In the final winter of the Roman Empire, historians describe a strange silence settling over the capital. Streets, once roaring with merchants and philosophers, now echoed with a different sound, the quiet unraveling of a giant that once believed it could never fall. Soldiers went unpaid. Grain shipments arrived late. Ordinary families felt the squeeze long before the senators did. And for years, no one realized they were living inside the most feared phase of an empire's life. The decline that begins not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Centuries later, Britain, a global superpower that once controlled a quarter of the earth, watched its currency collapse after World War II. The pound sterling, once the world's reserve currency, buckled under the weight of debt, inflation, and overextension. Empires don't fall in a day. They fade, inch by inch, choice by choice, crisis by crisis. And today, many fear that the United States, the current financial empire, stands on that same quiet edge because for the first time in modern history, the world is questioning the strong dollar. Debt has spiraled to unthinkable levels. The cost of living has outrun the paychecks that once defined the middle-class dream, and millions of people feel a pressure they can't quite explain, as though something enormous is shifting beneath their feet. This is the moment every empire throughout history has feared, the moment when the decline becomes visible, not to the elite, but to the ordinary people living through it. And whether we like it or not, we are living through it now. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you felt it. Not as some abstract macroeconomic headline, but as a weight pressing on your everyday life. Today's reality feels heavier, more fragile, more uncertain than anything most generations before us ever had to face. Maybe you've looked at housing prices and wondered how anyone your age is supposed to afford a home. Maybe your rent has jumped again this year, but your income hasn't. Groceries cost more, gas costs more, insurance costs more, everything costs more, except the value of your time and labor. Inflation hasn't just lifted prices, it has reshaped dreams. The idea of stability feels like a luxury now. Students step into adulthood carrying years of debt before they've even started living. Families juggle credit cards just to break even. People in their 30s and 40s are asking whether they'll ever retire, and behind it all is that quiet sense that the system wasn't built for you, or at least it's not the same system your parents grew up in. And the hardest part? Everyone keeps telling you to work harder, save more, be responsible. But deep down, you know the truth. The math doesn't add up anymore. Wages haven't kept pace with the rising cost of living. The middle class, once the backbone of the American financial empire, is thinning. For many, the modern economy feels like running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, while the ground beneath it grows less stable every year. If you've ever felt exhausted, anxious, or behind, listen closely. It's not your fault. The rules changed, the system shifted, and you're not imagining it. This pressure is real. We are living inside an economic environment shaped by decades of policies, debt expansion, and global shifts far outside any individual's control. This isn't a personal failure, it's the structural consequence of an empire in transition. The same pattern that is repeated throughout history, but it's not the end of the story. Far from it. History never repeats itself exactly, but it rhymes with unsettling precision. When you study the rise and fall of empires and the great economic collapses that shape the world, a chilling pattern emerges. The same warning signs appear again and again, across continents, cultures, and centuries, long before an empire realizes it's already in trouble. Look at Rome in its final centuries. Wealth concentrated at the top. Politicians more focused on self-preservation than public service. Debt soaring, currency debased to keep the illusion of prosperity alive. Ordinary citizens pushed deeper into struggle, while elites insisted everything was fine. Today, economists call this the late empire syndrome. Then consider the Spanish Empire. After flooding Europe with New World silver, Spain created one of the earliest forms of runaway inflation. Prices skyrocketed. The currency weakened. The empire became dependent on borrowing, a debt crisis disguised as prosperity. Sound familiar? Jump forward to the British Empire in the early 20th century. Once the center of global trade, Britain saw slow economic decline as costs rose, inequality widened, and trust in its currency weakened. When the pound finally lost its status as the world's reserve currency, it wasn't a sudden collapse. It was the final step in a long, predictable cycle. And then there's the United States in 1929. The Roaring Twenties felt unstoppable until the bubble burst. Debt-fueled optimism turned into panic. Wealth evaporated. Markets crashed. The patterns of excessive speculation, widening inequality, and fragile financial systems echoed again in 2008 when subprime debt brought the world to its knees. Even the 1970s, an era marked by stagflation, soaring prices, and declining trust in government institutions, mirror many of the pressures we see today. Across these stories, the same themes appear: a widening wealth gap, debt expanding faster than the real economy, a currency under pressure, rising living costs, public frustration and eroding trust, a powerful nation caught in the middle of a global transition it can't fully control. History repeats, not because people forget, but because empires follow predictable economic patterns. They rise through innovation, expand through ambition, peak in prosperity, and decline when internal weaknesses meet external challenges. And today, the United States stands at a crossroads that looks eerily familiar to those past empires. Not doomed, but undeniably entering the same phase every major financial empire eventually reaches. A phase where the cracks begin to show and the world quietly pays attention. Every empire that has risen to global dominance, from Rome to Britain to the United States, follows a hidden pattern, a cycle that unfolds quietly, almost invisibly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. And once you understand the cycle, the world suddenly makes a lot more sense. Economists often call it the empire cycle, or the long-term debt cycle, or the monetary collapse cycle. Different names, same underlying logic. It works in stages like the turning of seasons. Stage 1, the rise. This is the era of innovation, productivity, discipline. An empire grows not because of its size, but because of its character. Hard work, saving, stable money, and trust in institutions form the foundation. The currency strengthens, wealth expands, people believe in the future. This is the springtime of an empire. Stage 2, the prosperity peak. Success becomes self-reinforcing, trade increases, the nation becomes the center of global finance. Foreign nations borrow its currency, seek its protection, follow its rules. This is often the period when the country becomes a reserve currency, the financial heart of the world. But prosperity also breeds complacency. Debt grows, spending rises, the empire becomes accustomed to luxury. This is summer. Stage 3, the overextension phase. Costs rise, both at home and abroad. Maintaining influence becomes expensive. Governments take on more debt to keep life comfortable. The currency begins to weaken, but the public hardly notices. Inflation creeps in. Inequality widens. Trust erodes. This is autumn. Still beautiful, but the cold edge is coming. Stage 4, the decline. This is the part every empire fears. Debt piles up faster than it can be repaid. The currency loses purchasing power. The cost of living spikes. Political divisions intensify. Ordinary people feel squeezed. Leaders print more money to maintain stability, triggering inflation and sometimes even a dollar collapse in extreme cases. Wealth quietly transfers from the bottom to the top as asset owners thrive while workers fall behind. The empire does not collapse suddenly. It weakens slowly, predictably. This is winter, but here's the twist. The cycle isn't a prophecy of doom. It's a description of human behavior. When things are good, we overspend. When things get bad, we try to fix them with even more debt. And over time, the system bends until it can no longer hold. Today, many economists argue that America is no longer in the spring or summer of its empire, but firmly within the late autumn, perhaps even the early winter tree of the cycle. Not a collapse, not an ending, but a transition, a moment that feels confusing, frustrating, heavy, because it is. But cycles are not punishments, they are patterns. And understanding the pattern is the first step to understanding where we are and what comes next. Picture this. A young woman named Emily sits in her car outside her apartment. The engine is off, but she's still gripping the steering wheel like she's trying to hold herself together. She just finished her second job of the day. The one she took not to save for the future, but just to keep from falling behind. Inside her inbox are 3 emails she hasn't opened yet. One from her landlord announcing another rent increase, one from her student loan provider reminding her payment is due, and one from her boss asking if she can pick up a few extra hours this week. She closes her eyes. For a moment, she just breathes, because this isn't what she imagined adulthood would feel like. Emily did everything society told her was responsible. She worked hard, got a degree, stayed out of trouble, held down a steady job, but every month feels like running uphill in sand. The harder she tries to climb, the deeper she sinks. Groceries cost more this week than they did last week. Gas is unpredictable. Her health insurance feels like a luxury. And the idea of buying a house, it feels almost fictional. What she doesn't tell anyone, not her friends, not her parents, is how often she feels like she's failing. How often she wonders, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get ahead? But the truth is painfully simple. Emily isn't failing. She's living in an economy where the game board has been rearranged while she was busy trying to follow the rules. Millions of people feel this same quiet panic, the burnout, the fear of opening your bank app, the dread of a surprise bill, the guilt of feeling tired all the time, the sense of being stuck in a world that keeps asking for more while giving less. And what makes it even harder is the loneliness, the belief that everyone else is coping better than you. But they're not. Behind closed doors, behind social media highlights, behind polite conversations at work, people are struggling. Not because they made bad choices, not because they're lazy, but because the cost of simply existing has risen faster than their ability to adapt. This isn't just an economic story, it's an emotional one, a human one, and it's the same emotional weight people carried in every empire's late-stage cycle, when the cracks became too large for ordinary citizens to ignore, when the pressure of economic decline settled on the shoulders of people who did nothing to cause it. Emily's story isn't rare. It's the story of a generation trying to stay afloat in a world that keeps raising the waterline. To understand where we are in the empire cycle, we have to strip away emotion for a moment and look directly at the numbers, the cold, objective signals that every economist pays attention to, even when the public doesn't. First, the national debt. The United States has passed levels of debt to GDP that historically mark the late stages of an empire cycle. Debt is growing faster than the real economy's ability to produce value, and servicing that debt, just paying the interest on it, is becoming one of the largest expenses in the federal budget. This is exactly how past empires slid from strength into vulnerability, not through sudden collapse, but through the silent burden of compounding debt. Then there's inflation. The cost of living hasn't simply gone up, it has structurally shifted. Even after the sharp spikes of recent years, inflation has settled at a higher baseline. Groceries are 25–30% more expensive than just a few years ago. Rent continues to rise across major cities. Medical costs climb every year. This is what late-stage currency debasement looks like. Money slowly loses purchasing power, and ordinary people feel poorer even when earning more dollars. Interest rates tell another part of the story. To control inflation, the Federal Reserve raised rates to levels not seen in over 2 decades. Higher rates cool the economy, yes, but they also expose weaknesses. Companies relying on cheap borrowing begin to crack. Housing affordability collapses. Debt becomes heavier. These are classic late cycle stress signals. And then there's the middle class, the foundation of every stable empire. For decades, wages for ordinary workers have stagnated while the cost of essential goods has risen dramatically. Wealth is increasingly concentrated at the top. Asset owners thrive while renters fall behind. This quiet wealth transfer is not the cause of decline, but one of its unmistakable symptoms. Add to that global shifts. Countries are experimenting with ways to reduce dependence on the US dollar. Trade alliances are changing. Geopolitical tensions are rising. None of these alone signal collapse, but together they mark a transition. The same transition we saw when Britain lost global reserve currency status, when Spain lost economic influence, when Rome lost control over its vast territories. So where are we in the cycle? We are not at collapse. We are not at the end, but we are well past the peak. America is in the late stages of the empire cycle, the period economists call the early decline or the stagnation phase. It's the moment when imbalances built up over decades begin to surface. The debt crisis, the inflation surge, the shrinking middle class, the rising global competition. This stage feels chaotic because it is chaotic. This stage feels uncertain because it is uncertain, but it is also predictable and navigable once we understand the forces at work. The world is changing, just as it has changed many times before, and if history is any guide, what comes next isn't doom, but transformation. If there's one truth history teaches us, it's this: decline is never the end of the story. Not for empires, not for economies, and certainly not for people. The cycles that shape nations are bigger than any one of us, and yet within these cycles, individuals have always found ways to adapt, to rise, and to build something new. Every transformation in history created space for innovation, for resilience, for new leadership, for new wealth, for new ideas. And the people who understood the cycle, who learned instead of feared, were always the ones who moved forward the strongest. Right now, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. The news is loud, the future feels uncertain, and the world seems to be shifting faster than you can keep up. But understanding the cycle is power. It turns fear into clarity. It turns confusion into strategy. Because when you see the pattern, you stop taking the struggle personally. You stop blaming yourself for forces that were set in motion decades before you were born. You begin to realize that this moment, this exact point in history, is not just a crisis. It's also an opening. Yes, we are living through the early winter of an empire's cycle. Yes, the economy is strained. Yes, the old systems are failing, but winter has purpose. It clears the ground. It resets the landscape. It prepares the world for its next chapter. And those who stay awake during winter, those who stay informed, who stay adaptable, who stay resilient, are the ones who shape the spring that follows. So if you felt tired, overwhelmed, or small, breathe. You are not small. You are living through one of the most important chapters in economic history, a chapter where knowledge becomes a form of armor. You're not powerless. You're early. And as the world shifts, so can you. If this story resonated with you, please share your sense of strength in the comments. And let's spread this quiet pride to the world.